Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Ryan Sinclair, and today I'm going to talk about the exposome, our unique exposures. This description is part of the series where we discuss the 4 E's. Those are the concepts of externality, environmental justice, exposure assessment, and the exposome. These 4 terms are used to describe our overall social and physical interactions with environment and pollution. The figure here with the runners is a visual tool for you to understand how these concepts relate to an individual. So these are runners that conceivably live somewhere near the beach, and they're out for their daily run. And there is a ship in the background that is producing a big plume of particulate pollution. So if you consider the runner's experience, that ship is producing a large amount of particulate pollution that otherwise healthy beach-dwelling locals would not be exposed to. The pollution is part of the runner's lifetime experience and therefore a component of their exposome. We could measure the exposome in terms of the amount of pollution that they're expected to breathe in, or we could measure it in terms of their blood concentrations for target contaminants that represent that ship's pollutants. So did you get that? I meant 2 things. You can measure the exposome in terms of 1, the outside pollution as it comes in, and then number 2, the pollution measured on the inside after we are exposed. So again, that was 2 things. You can measure exposome in 2 ways. You can measure the whole environment and the pollution that's out there, and maybe some other pollution here and there, and other types of stressors and things that they're experiencing. Or you can measure it on the inside using biological methods, by taking blood samples or urine samples or hair samples or something. So the CDC's definition of the exposome is a measure of all the exposures of an individual in a lifetime and how those exposures relate to health. One of the primary authors on the concept of the exposome is Dr. Rappaport at UC Berkeley. He published an article in Science that further defines the exposome. So here again is the CDC's definition, and again that is measures of all the exposures of an individual in a lifetime and how those exposures relate to health. I have the website here. And then there's Dr. Rappaport, and he has a different definition which is largely the same. His article states that the exposome refers to the totality of environmental exposures from conception onwards and has been proposed to be a critical entity for disease etiology. So that's a much more technical and complicated definition than the CDC definition, but it means essentially the same thing. Dr. Rappaport, in his article, he goes on to discuss how we can approach the exposome from a bottom-up perspective. So I have that here in this figure. He says that we could measure all chemicals in each external source to characterize each person's unique experience over time at several time points across a lifespan. He says that this would require an enormous effort. So that's this bottom-up component here. So we could measure all chemicals in each external source that we're exposed to. So that would be like those runners measuring the amount of air pollution there, and then when they go home and they maybe have a fight or a squabble with their family members at home, and that produces stress, we measure how those stress hormones change different things, and then maybe a few years down the road somebody's replacing some asbestos pollution, and you measure that, and that would just require it's unheard of and overwhelming to think about. So contrary to this bottom-up method, Dr. Rappaport presents the top-down method, where you can measure a cross-section of somebody's exposome at different time periods, maybe at the end of their life, during their middle of their life, or even infants. In fact, we do this pretty often. The best example is blood lead levels. Physicians will always check. At some age, pediatricians will always check blood lead level in the U.S. So the top-down perspective, where we would measure all chemicals in the subject's blood to determine their overall exposome. In theory, this could be done only a few times, once or a few times, depending on what you're looking for. So the top-down also includes something that the bottom-up doesn't consider. And I have that here. The top-down includes something else, and this is the article as Dr. Rappaport presented it. But it's the mere fact that many chemicals and other hazards are produced within our body. Some of the things that respond to our life experiences could be those epigenetic items that we heard about from Dr. Tony Aiton in a previous video. And those could be chemical interactions that are a result of lifestyle and stress. So the concept of exposome, if you think about measuring on the outside of our body, that's like all of the environmental factors. But if you think about it in terms of the inside of our body, that would include, maybe things that we eat that give us health, but also things that we take in psychologically and also take in our bodies that will maybe either inhibit or promote certain genetic components. So there's an epigenetic component to this. So here's another visual aid that I have from yet another article. This visual aid presents the different external environments in reference to our internal environment. This is a figure published in the article titled The Exposome, a new paradigm to study the impact of environmental health. So the author here, he has a figure with 3 specific areas of the exposome. Let's start with the first one on the bottom left. So the external environment is right here, and this could be combined with the things that are experienced by us without any input from us. So these are all things that are around us: the urban environment, green spaces, even social capital, traffic. And so in a lot of cases, if you don't have any interaction with these things, you don't have any investment in them, then you may get benefits from them. So like, say, a lot of parks, green spaces, a nice climate, you may get a health benefit from living those things. And on the contrary, you may get a health risk from experiencing those things as well. So that's represented in the left corner here. Do you remember this concept from the last video? That's called externality. It matches well with this figure. So you'll see that externality and this concept of exposome, they kind of go hand in hand. Well, actually, the externality fits in a box within the exposome, or in this case, a bubble. So we also have the opportunity, not only down here, but if we moved up here to the specific external environment, like they say it here, this is similar to maybe the examples of the runners from the first image I showed you. Those runners are making a choice to exercise and run. They are also making a choice probably to have healthy lives and drink water and have a lot of physical activity and healthy foods like, I don't know, apples. And maybe they don't use harsh consumer poisons in their house or smoke cigarettes. So those things, if it's in a positive way, that's they call it here the specific external environment. So when both of these two things interact, we've got this externality here, and then we have the things that we can change here. And remember, that also goes to this other figure that we have with the rest of this mini lessons integrated project. Anyway, so when we have those things together, they all interact and go into our internal environment. And yet again, we can have this thing up here on the top and this thing down here on the bottom in terms of what we take in our body and how we exercise, how we treat our bodies, and then the things that we can't control, the externalities. And all of those can all influence the internal environment. So when they're inside of us, those items will impact transcriptomics, proteomics, metabolomics. All of these words are fancy items that mean outside stressors, and healthy items can influence the inner workings of our body. So things that promote metabolism in a certain way, things that promote protein creation or destruction or hiding in certain ways, and things that promote or de-promote transcription, genetic transcription. So that's what those terms mean. But ultimately, the internal and external things, the two types of external things that I have here. Up here, there's the choices we make, and then the externality items. Those all influence the internal workings of our body. So when I first heard this term externality, or when I heard the term exposome, I thought it was an unnecessary new word to describe what is already described in those framework of exposure assessment. And remember, that's the framework exposure assessment within the framework of environmental health risk assessment. I now understand that these two concepts are different. The exposome is a broad concept that could include several exposure assessments to characterize an individual overall experience. The exposome also allows the concepts of externality, epigenetics, and even environmental justice to be used within the exposome. So we could have an environmental injustice, for example, that we experience, and that can contribute to our exposome. Or in terms of epigenetics, that environmental injustice could trigger something that causes a negative epigenetic reaction in our bodies to produce a negative health effect. Also, this concept of externality that I just finished talking about. So I'm introducing you to this as a new framework for which you can approach life experience with environmental factors. All the other 4 E's that I just talked about, they all fit well within this concept.